For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Solaris was a world of eternal light, where twin suns burned ceaselessly in an unbroken sky. The shimmering brightness wasn't just part of its environment, it was the essence of its people, the Lumirans. Their blue skin sparkled faintly in the glare, and their lives revolved around the light. To them, shadows were untrustworthy, a sign of weakness or decay. Darkness, in any form, was a terror woven into their history, whispered only as a cautionary tale to frightened children. Nova stood at the edge of the radiant cliffs, overlooking Solaris's endless plains, her arms crossed and her long, white braid trailing behind her like a whip of silver fire. She was a beacon of confidence and strength among her people, a celebrated warrior and thinker, but the gnawing fear of darkness clung to her as tightly as it did to the others. She hated it, hated how the very thought of the absence of light could paralyze her. Her sharp blue eyes turned skyward, searching for the invisible borders of her world. She knew there was more out there, far beyond Solaris's blinding suns and relentless radiance. Stories of starry voids and shadowed wonders had reached her ears from scattered interstellar broadcasts, intercepted by Lumiran technology. She had spent countless nights dreaming of those worlds, of stars twinkling in a velvet black sky, even if the thought of it sent shivers down her spine. But Nova's daring aspirations were stifled by fear. The light was safety, certainty, and control. The dark, chaos, death, and the unknown. Her musings were interrupted by a brilliant flash streaking across the sky, a shooting star. No, it was too bright and moving too fast. She shielded her eyes as the object plummeted toward the plains, leaving a fiery trail in its wake. It crashed with a distant but bone-shaking impact, sending a pulse of strange energy rippling outward. Lumiran law dictated caution around anything foreign, but Nova's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. She summoned her hover glider, a sleek craft powered by solar energy, and sped toward the crash site. The air grew heavier as she approached, the brightness dimming slightly from the smoke and heat rising from the wreckage. But the sight of movement near the ship drew her closer. What she saw as she dismounted her glider made her breath catch. A strange, angular craft lay half-buried in the scorched ground, its metallic surface scorched black in places. Sparks sputtered from its edges, casting dancing shadows across the smoky air. Shadows. Nova hesitated, her pulse quickening as unease crept over her. A figure emerged, a humanoid male, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin like sun-warmed bronze and dark hair matted with sweat. His black eyes locked onto hers, a mixture of wariness and awe in his gaze. He stood confidently, despite his apparent exhaustion, his stance suggesting both strength and readiness for a fight. Nova's blue lips parted as she took him in. He was unlike anything she had ever seen. The man exuded a ruggedness that felt utterly foreign in a world so polished and bright. Yet there was something captivating in the way his eyes darted to assess her, his posture speaking volumes about his resilience. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of curiosity. He frowned, not understanding her language, but his own deep voice rumbled in reply. "Ethan, astronaut, Earth." The words were incomprehensible to her, but the tone conveyed enough. She noticed the small translator device clipped to his belt. The Lumirans had something similar. She gestured sharply, indicating for him to turn it on. Ethan hesitated, his hand brushing over the device before activating it. The soft hum of translation tech filled the air. "I said, 'Who are you?'" she repeated, her words now synchronized into his ear. Ethan straightened, clearly sensing her authority. "Ethan Carter," he said again, his voice clear. "I'm a pilot, or was, until my ship malfunctioned. Are you from this planet?" Her narrowed eyes softened slightly. "I am Nova. You're not supposed to be here, human." "I figured as much," Ethan muttered, casting a wary glance around. "But I didn't have much of a choice. My ship lost power, and this was the closest landing point." Nova's gaze flicked to the wreckage. The dark scorch marks on the metal, the flickering remnants of power, it all fascinated her in ways she couldn't explain. This was something new, something alien, something beyond Solaris. She looked back at Ethan, her curiosity mingling with unease. He was a creature of the dark, his kind thriving in the void between stars. And yet, there was a steadiness in him, a grounded strength that intrigued her. "Your presence will disturb my people," she said, her tone carefully measured. "They fear anything from beyond Solaris, especially anything that carries darkness." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. Darkness isn't so bad. It's just different. Maybe you could learn to see it the way I do. Nova's eyes narrowed again, her fear prickling at the edges of her mind. The human spoke of darkness as if it were something to embrace, not something to avoid. The very idea was enough to make her skin crawl, but also, strangely, to make her pulse quicken. "Show me," she said suddenly, the words escaping her before she could reconsider. Ethan's brows rose in surprise, but he nodded. "All right, but you might not like what you find." Nova tilted her chin upward, her confidence returning. "We'll see." As they stood amidst the smoldering wreckage, their worlds collided in a tenuous balance of intrigue and unease. For the first time in her life, Nova took a step toward the shadows. Ethan worked swiftly, salvaging what he could from the wreckage of his ship. The acrid smell of burning metal hung heavy in the air as Nova stood at a distance, her arms crossed over her chest. She tried to mask her unease with a hardened expression, but every flicker of shadow cast by the sparks set her nerves on edge. "You seem on edge," Ethan observed, glancing up at her. His tone was casual, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, like he was trying to unravel the mystery of the woman standing before him. Nova's eyes flashed. "Your presence alone is enough to unsettle me, human. My people have spent lifetimes avoiding anything like you, anything that might bring the dark." Ethan smirked faintly. "Well, lucky for you, I'm not here to stay." Her posture stiffened at his dismissal, and she took a step closer, the sunlight catching the faint shimmer of her blue skin. "You think this is temporary?" she challenged. "You've crash-landed on Solaris? My people won't take kindly to your intrusion." "Noted," Ethan replied with a shrug. "But my job isn't to win popularity contests. It's to survive and maybe fix my ship before your entire planet decides to throw me into one of those suns." Nova's lips tightened into a thin line. He spoke with a casual confidence that was both infuriating and, strangely, appealing. She couldn't recall anyone among her kind ever addressing her with such irreverence. Her people respected her authority without question. Ethan, he seemed utterly unimpressed by it. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice softer this time, curiosity overriding her frustration. "Why leave your world to venture into the unknown?" Ethan paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a moment, he hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "To explore," he said finally, "to see what's out there. Earth is just one dot in an ocean of stars. There's so much more to discover." Nova tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. "And the dark? It doesn't frighten you?" Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Not at all. The dark's where you find the stars. It's where the universe shows you its secrets." Nova's stomach twisted at his words. The idea of embracing darkness as something beautiful was so alien to her that it felt almost sacrilegious. Yet, she couldn't deny the magnetic pull of his voice or the flicker of curiosity sparking in her chest. What was it about this human that made her question everything she'd been taught? Their conversation was interrupted by the hum of approaching hovercrafts. Nova's head snapped up, her sharp eyes catching the glint of sunlight on sleek metallic surfaces. A trio of Lumiran enforcers was heading their way. She turned back to Ethan, her expression hardening. "You need to hide," she ordered. Ethan frowned. "Hide? I thought you were in charge here." "I am," Nova snapped, "but they don't trust me as much as they fear me. If they see you, they'll assume the worst. They'll call for your capture or worse." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He ducked into the wreckage, crouching behind a jagged panel of the ship's hull just as the hovercrafts landed. Nova straightened her posture, her expression icy and commanding, as the enforcers dismounted. "Commander Nova," one of them greeted, bowing his head. "We detected an anomaly in this sector. Reports of a crash." Nova gestured to the wreckage behind her. "You're looking at it. A foreign object breached our atmosphere. I came to investigate." The enforcer's eyes narrowed. "Foreign? Has there been contact?" "No," Nova lied smoothly. "Whatever was aboard appears to have been destroyed on impact." The enforcer's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than she liked. "You should return to the capital, Commander. This is no place for one of your standing. We'll secure the site and ensure no contaminants spread." Nova's lips pressed into a tight line. "There's nothing to secure. This object is inert. But if you insist, I'll leave you to your inspections." Without waiting for a response, she turned sharply and mounted her glider. The enforcers hesitated before nodding and turning to the wreckage. Nova allowed herself a single glance back at the shadows where Ethan was hidden before speeding off. When she was far enough away, she circled back to the crash site, landing silently just beyond the enforcer's sight. Ethan emerged from the shadows, his expression grim. "Let me guess," he said. "They're not big on hospitality. They'll destroy you if they find you," Nova replied bluntly. "You're a threat to everything they believe in." Ethan leaned against a broken panel, his dark eyes studying her. "And what do you believe in, Nova? Do you think I'm a threat?" Her breath caught at the intensity of his gaze. She wanted to say yes, to dismiss him as just another dangerous unknown, but something about him made it impossible to look away. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've shown me a world I don't yet understand, and that terrifies me more than anything." Ethan stepped closer, the heat of his presence cutting through the chill creeping into her veins. "Fear's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it means you're on the edge of something amazing." Nova's pulse quickened as his words hung in the air between them. For the first time, she wondered if the darkness she feared so much might hold more than just danger. It might hold possibility. The fractured remains of Ethan's ship glinted faintly in Solaris's eternal sunlight as he and Nova worked to create a makeshift shelter. The looming threat of Lumiran enforcers meant they had to stay hidden, but Ethan knew they couldn't rely on concealment alone. His ship's remaining power cells were unstable, and without a plan, the enforcers would eventually discover him. Nova watched as Ethan maneuvered around the debris, his movements deliberate and efficient. His ability to adapt to face a hostile world so confidently unnerved her as much as it fascinated her. The tools and materials he used were foreign to her, but the way he shaped order from chaos held an odd kind of beauty. "What exactly are you doing?" Nova asked, crossing her arms as she leaned against a tilted piece of hull plating. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, his black eyes flicking up to meet hers, creating a safe spot, temporary at least. "I need a place where I can recharge my translator and figure out what to do next." "Recharge?" she repeated. Her gaze wandered to the small device clipped to his belt, her curiosity once again overriding her reservations. "You mean it runs on stored light?" "Not exactly," Ethan replied, smirking faintly at her deduction. "It's powered by energy cells. Not too different from your tech, I imagine, but it's got a limited charge, and I don't have a twin sun paradise to refuel it." Nova bristled at his tone. "Your tone is bold for someone entirely dependent on my mercy, human." Ethan raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "You're not wrong, but let's be honest, if you wanted me gone, I'd already be ash by now." Her lips twitched, though she masked the faint hint of amusement before it could surface. She hated how easily he disarmed her with his confidence. Most Lumirans cowered before her authority. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to regard her as an equal. It was unsettling. Yet, it was also the reason she hadn't turned him over to the enforcers. There was something different about him, something she couldn't ignore. As the sun began to dip ever so slightly, a rare occurrence on Solaris that signaled the brief dimming known as the Veil Hour, Ethan motioned for her to step closer. "Come here," he said, his voice softer than before. Nova hesitated, her instincts screaming against the idea of stepping into the shadowy interior of his makeshift shelter. The panels and fragments he'd arranged created small pockets of dimness, places where light barely reached. She could already feel her skin tingling with unease. "Why?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. Ethan didn't move closer, sensing her hesitation. Instead, he extended a hand toward her. His expression wasn't mocking or condescending, it was inviting, as if he understood the depth of her fear. "Because you're afraid of the dark," he said simply, "and I want to show you it's not as bad as you think." Nova stared at his outstretched hand, her pride warring with her fear. She was Nova, commander of the Lumirans, a paragon of strength and dominance. Yet the idea of stepping into shadow, of relinquishing her connection to the light, even for a moment made her feel like a fragile child. But Ethan's steady gaze held no judgment, only patience. Swallowing her unease, Nova took a step forward. The moment her foot crossed the threshold into the dim interior, her heart pounded in her chest. The shadows seemed to press in on her, foreign and suffocating. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain still. "Good," Ethan said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Just breathe. You're safe." She shot him a glare, her pride flaring up again. "I don't need your reassurance." Ethan chuckled softly. "Suit yourself, but I think you do." Nova's eyes adjusted slowly to the faint light within the shelter. For the first time, she noticed the intricate details of his ship's remains, the scorch marks on the metal, the subtle textures of human craftsmanship. She'd never taken the time to notice such things in full sunlight. The brightness washed away nuance. Here, in the muted light, the world seemed different. Ethan crouched near a small projection device he'd salvaged from his ship. With a few deft movements, he activated it, and a shimmering field of light appeared between them. At first, Nova thought it was a strange, glowing map, but then the image resolved into a breathtaking vista. Stars. Earth's night sky, Ethan explained, watching her reaction closely. This is what it looks like when you step away from the light. Nova's breath caught. The stars glimmered like scattered diamonds on a field of black, their arrangement alien and mesmerizing. She reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the projection. The light bent and shifted around her touch, but the stars remained. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Ethan smiled. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. Darkness isn't something to fear, it's where beauty thrives." Nova's eyes flicked to his, her expression unreadable. How can something so vast not destroy you? How can you look at this and not feel small? Ethan shrugged, leaning back on his heels. Because feeling small isn't the same as being powerless. Out there in the dark, you realize how connected everything is. It's humbling, yeah, but it's also freeing. Nova fell silent, her mind racing. Everything about her world, the light, the safety, the traditions, seemed suddenly fragile in the face of what Ethan had shown her. For the first time, she wondered if her fear had been a cage all along. As the projection faded and the shelter grew dimmer, Nova surprised herself by not retreating into the light. Instead, she stayed, her gaze locked on Ethan. The human had stirred something in her, a flicker of rebellion against everything she'd known. "We need to move soon," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Your people are going to find me eventually." Nova nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll move into the twilight. There's a place on the edge of Solaris where the light fades. It's forbidden, but it'll give us time." Ethan's eyes lit with intrigue. The edge of Solaris? Sounds like my kind of place. Nova allowed a faint smirk. "Don't get too comfortable, human. You haven't earned my trust yet." Ethan's grin widened. Challenge accepted. Together they prepared to leave the blinding safety of Solaris's core for the forbidden twilight, a journey that would test both their courage and their growing connection. The journey to the twilight edge of Solaris was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Nova piloted her sleek hoverglider with precision, her hands steady on the controls, while Ethan clung to the back, his larger frame awkwardly squeezed onto the Lumiran craft. The stark light of the twin suns began to wane as they ventured further, the landscape shifting from the gleaming brightness of the endless plains to softer, more muted tones. For Nova, the dimming light was unnerving. Her instincts screamed to turn back, to return to the safety of the sun-drenched capital. But she forced herself to press forward. Ethan's calm presence behind her was a strange comfort, his unwavering trust in the dark, contrasting sharply with her deep-seated fear. "Are we close?" Ethan asked over the roar of the wind, his voice filled with anticipation. "Not far," Nova replied, her tone clipped. She glanced over her shoulder at him, her blue eyes narrowing. "Don't get too excited. No Lumiran has ever dared to stay in the twilight for long. There's a reason it's forbidden." Ethan smirked, unfazed. "Forbidden usually means interesting." Nova rolled her eyes, but said nothing. Instead, she focused on the horizon, where the twin suns hung lower than she'd ever seen them, casting long, golden shadows across the rocky terrain. The glow of the suns seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness, and the air grew cooler, sharper. When they finally reached the twilight region, Nova brought the glider to a halt. The land ahead was veiled in dim light, a stark contrast to the unrelenting brightness of Solaris's core. The rocky cliffs shimmered faintly with bioluminescent plants, their soft glows forming eerie constellations across the ground. Strange creatures flitted through the air, their translucent wings catching the faint light. Nova dismounted the glider, her movements tense. She scanned the area, her sharp gaze darting between the shadows, as if expecting some lurking danger to emerge. Ethan, on the other hand, stepped forward with unbridled curiosity. He crouched near a glowing plant, running his fingers lightly over its delicate petals. "This place is incredible," he murmured, his black eyes wide with wonder. "It's alive in ways I didn't expect." Nova watched him with a mixture of fascination and unease. She couldn't understand how he could move so freely in the twilight, so unafraid of the shadows that crept closer with every passing moment. "Be careful," she warned, her voice tight. "The twilight may look beautiful, but it's unpredictable. We don't know what dangers lie here." Ethan straightened and turned to face her, a small smile playing on his lips. "You ever stop to think that maybe the danger isn't in the twilight itself, but in how your people see it?" Nova bristled at his words, but before she could reply, A soft chime echoed from the device strapped to Ethan's wrist. He glanced down, his expression shifting to one of surprise and relief. "My navigation system," he said, gesturing to the device. "It's picking up faint star patterns. If we can calibrate it with your planet's geography, I might be able to repair my ship faster." Nova hesitated, torn between her distrust of the dark and her growing respect for Ethan's resourcefulness. Finally, she nodded. "Do what you need to, but stay close to me." Ethan grinned. "You afraid I'll wander off?" "No," Nova replied sharply. "I'm afraid something might decide, you look like an easy meal." Ethan chuckled, but complied, following her lead as they explored the twilight region. With each step, Nova found herself growing more attuned to the strange beauty of the place. The bioluminescent plants pulsed gently, their rhythms like the steady beat of a heart. The creatures that glided through the air left trails of shimmering light, creating fleeting patterns that reminded her of the stars Ethan had shown her. "You're quieter than usual," Ethan observed, glancing at her. "What's on your mind?" Nova's blue eyes flicked to him, her expression guarded. "This place, it feels wrong, but it also feels alive. I've never seen anything like it." "That's the thing about the unknown," Ethan said. "It scares you, but it also makes you realize how much you've been missing." His words lingered in her mind as they reached the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast, shadowed valley. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, faint pinpricks of light that dotted the heavens. Nova's breath hitched as she stared up, her heart pounding. "Those are stars," she whispered, her voice trembling, "like the ones you showed me." Ethan stepped beside her, his gaze softening as he watched her reaction. "Yeah, the real thing is even better, huh?" Nova couldn't tear her eyes away. The stars seemed endless, each one a tiny beacon in the darkness. She felt a strange sensation building in her chest, a mixture of awe and longing, as if the stars were calling to her in a way she couldn't explain. "I've lived my entire life in the light," she said quietly. I never imagined this could exist." Ethan's voice was gentle when he replied. "You've spent your whole life fearing the dark, but now you see it's not your enemy. It's just different." Nova turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You say that so easily, but for me, this is a war against everything I've ever known." Ethan's gaze softened. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. The contact sent a jolt through her, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let his steady presence ground her as she took in the vastness of the twilight world. "Then maybe it's time to start rewriting what you know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, they stood together in silence, the stars above and the glowing valley below, wrapping them in a cocoon of quiet wonder. But neither of them noticed the faint shadow moving in the distance, a figure watching them, its eyes burning with hostility. The twilight edge of Solaris stretched infinitely before them, the horizon blending seamlessly into darkness. Nova and Ethan pressed deeper into the dim wilderness, guided only by the faint glimmers of bioluminescent plants and the growing confidence in Nova's steps. For her, every moment in the shadows was a battle between instinct and courage, but Ethan's presence had a calming effect. She wasn't sure if it was his calm demeanor or the way his confidence in the unknown seemed to pull her forward. But she knew one thing: this journey had already changed her. The terrain became rugged as they descended into a hidden valley, the temperature cooler than anything Nova had ever experienced. Ethan carried a small pack of salvaged tools, using them to map and scan the area for materials to repair his ship. Nova followed closely, her sharp eyes scanning the twilight for potential threats. "We should stop here," Ethan said, kneeling beside a cluster of glowing rocks. He tapped his wrist device, the small screen lighting up with data. "This mineral has the properties I need for the ship's core. If I can extract enough, we'll be one step closer to getting off this planet." Nova folded her arms, watching him work. "And where will you go once you leave?" Ethan glanced up, pausing. "Depends. Back to Earth if I can, but maybe not right away. There's a lot out here to see, worlds like this one, places people haven't dared to explore." Nova's gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. "You talk about the universe as if it's yours to claim." Ethan chuckled softly. "It's not about claiming. It's about understanding. I just want to see what's out there, learn from it, that's all." His words struck a chord in Nova. She'd spent her entire life rooted in the rigid traditions of Solaris, where every step was dictated by the relentless sun and the fear of the dark. Ethan's perspective was as foreign to her as the stars themselves, yet it stirred something deep inside, a yearning she'd tried to bury. As Ethan worked, Nova's attention was drawn to a faint rustling sound in the distance. Her instincts sharpened, and she straightened, scanning the shadows with narrowed eyes. "Something's out there," she said, her voice low. Ethan froze, his hand moving to the small survival knife strapped to his thigh. "What do you see?" Nova didn't answer immediately. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and precise, her senses honed. The rustling grew louder, closer, until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a Lumiran male, his blue skin shimmering faintly in the bioluminescent light. His eyes burned with intensity, his stance rigid and hostile. Nova recognized him immediately. Kael, one of her most vocal rivals within the Lumiran leadership. "Nova," Kael said, his voice sharp and accusatory. "What are you doing here? And why are you with that?" He spat the last word, his gaze shifting to Ethan with disdain. Ethan straightened, his grip tightening on the knife, but he didn't move. Nova stepped forward, her expression cold. "Kael, this is none of your concern. Return to the capital." Kael's eyes narrowed. "None of my concern. You've brought an outsider, a human, into our sacred lands. Do you realize what you've done? You've betrayed everything our people stand for." "I've done no such thing," Nova shot back, her voice steady. "This human is no threat to us. He's stranded here, and I'm helping him survive." "Helping him?" Kael's voice rose, his anger palpable. "You're jeopardizing the safety of Solaris for what? Curiosity? Or have you been corrupted by his lies?" Ethan took a step forward, his presence solid and unwavering. "I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm just trying to leave." Kael sneered. "Silence, human. Your words mean nothing here." Nova's patience snapped. She moved between Kael and Ethan, her posture commanding. "Enough, Kael. This isn't about him. It's about your fear of the unknown, fear of anything that challenges your narrow view of the world. But I won't let you dictate my actions." Kael's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "You've gone too far, Nova. The Council will hear of this. They will demand retribution." "Let them," Nova said coldly, "but you won't touch him. Not while I'm here." The tension crackled in the air like static, but Kael didn't make a move. After a long, charged moment, he stepped back, his eyes filled with venom. "This isn't over," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've made your choice, Nova, and you'll pay for it." With that, Kael turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving silence in his wake. Nova exhaled slowly, her body relaxing for the first time in minutes. "Well," Ethan said, breaking the quiet, "he seems fun." Nova shot him a sharp look, but the corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the faintest hint of a smile. "Don't provoke him. Kael's dangerous, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "What happens now?" "We move," Nova said firmly. "Kael will return with others. We need to get to the darkest region before he does." Ethan hesitated, then stepped closer. "Are you sure about this? You're risking a lot for me." Nova met his gaze, her blue eyes unwavering. "I don't know why, but I am. Maybe it's because you've shown me something I never thought possible. Or maybe it's because, for the first time, I'm questioning everything I've been told." Ethan's voice softened. "You're braver than you think." Nova turned away, unwilling to let him see how much his words affected her. "Come on, we don't have time to waste." Together, they ventured deeper into the shadows, leaving the fading light of Solaris behind. Around them, the stars began to emerge in full, their brilliance illuminating the path ahead. But neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched and that their greatest challenges were yet to come. The darkest region of Solaris lay ahead, an uncharted expanse where the twin suns never reached. Nova's steps were steady, her resolve firm, but her thoughts churned with unease. Kael's venomous words echoed in her mind, and the weight of her defiance pressed heavily on her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she was truly untethered, cut off from her people and her traditions. Yet, beside her, Ethan was a constant presence, steady, curious, and unflinching. The stars above grew brighter as the light of Solaris faded behind them. Nova found herself glancing upward more often, her fear of the dark slowly giving way to awe. The stars were more than just specks of light. They were alive with stories, patterns, and mysteries that she couldn't begin to comprehend. Ethan had begun pointing out constellations, sharing tales of Earth's skies, and Nova found herself hanging on his every word. "It's strange," she said quietly, as they paused by a glowing stream. The bioluminescent water shimmered softly, casting rippling light on her blue skin. "The stars should terrify me, but instead, they feel like they're calling to me." Ethan crouched beside the stream, filling a small container with the luminous water. Maybe that's because they've always been part of you, even if you didn't know it. He looked up at her, his dark eyes thoughtful. You're not as different from the stars as you think. Both are beautiful, untouchable, and they shine brightest in the dark. Nova's breath caught at his words, and for a moment, the space between them seemed to shrink. The way he looked at her with a mixture of admiration and understanding left her feeling exposed and alive all at once. She quickly looked away, focusing on the stream. We should keep moving, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ethan nodded, sensing the shift in her demeanor. He rose to his feet, and together they continued deeper into the shadows. The terrain became more treacherous, the air cooler, but the stars seemed to light their path. Nova's unease lingered, though. She couldn't shake the feeling that Kael wasn't far behind. Her fears were confirmed when they reached a narrow pass between two jagged cliffs. The path was barely wide enough for them to traverse single file, and the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. As they entered the pass, a sudden movement ahead made Nova freeze. A group of Lumirans emerged from the darkness, their blue skin glowing faintly in the starlight. At the center was Kael, his expression smug and triumphant. Nova, he said, his voice echoing off the cliffs. Did you really think you could escape my reach? Nova stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and Kael. I don't answer to you, Kael. Stand down. Kael's laughter was cold. Stand down? You've disgraced yourself and our people. You've embraced the corruption of the dark, and you've brought this human into our sacred lands. You've gone too far. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. We don't want any trouble. Let us pass, and we'll be out of your way. Kael's gaze snapped to Ethan, his eyes narrowing with contempt. You speak as if you have a say in this, human, but you're nothing more than an infection that must be eradicated. Nova's anger flared. Enough, Kael. Ethan has done nothing to harm us. Your hatred blinds you. No, Nova, Kael replied, his tone venomous. It's you who's blind. You've let this thing poison your mind. But I'll fix that. He raised his hand, signaling his followers. They stepped forward, weapons drawn, sleek, glowing blades, designed to harness the power of Solaris's light. Nova's pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. You'll have to go through me, she said coldly, drawing her own weapon, a curved blade that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Her stance was firm, her determination unshakable. Ethan stepped up beside her, his knife in hand. You don't have to do this alone, he said, his voice low but steady. Nova glanced at him, her expression softening for a brief moment. I can't let them hurt you. And I won't let them hurt you, Ethan replied. Kael sneered. How touching. Let's see how long your bond lasts in the face of true Lumiran power. The fight erupted with a flash of light as Kael's followers charged. Nova moved with the precision of a trained warrior, her blade meeting theirs in a dazzling clash. Ethan fought beside her, his movements raw but effective. Despite his lack of formal training, his strength and quick reflexes held their own against the Lumirans. The narrow pass became a battlefield of light and shadow, the glowing weapons illuminating the combatants in bursts of brilliance. Nova's focus was razor-sharp, her every move calculated. But even as she fought, she couldn't help but notice Ethan's bravery. He fought not for himself, but for her, for them. Kael pushed through the chaos, his blade aimed directly at Ethan. Nova saw the attack coming and moved instinctively, intercepting Kael's strike with a resounding clash of metal. Their blades locked, and Kael's face twisted in fury. You've betrayed everything, Nova, he hissed. Our people, our traditions, everything that makes us strong. No, Kael, Nova shot back, her voice fierce. It's your hatred that weakens us. The universe is bigger than Solaris, and I won't let you chain us to fear. With a surge of strength, she pushed Kael back, her blade cutting through his defenses. Kael stumbled, his followers faltering at the sight of their leader's defeat. Nova seized the moment. Enough, she commanded, her voice echoing through the pass. Leave now, and you'll live. Stay, and you'll face the consequences. Kael glared at her, but he knew he was beaten. With a sharp gesture, he signaled his followers to retreat. The Lumirans disappeared into the shadows, their defeat marked by silence. Ethan leaned against the cliff wall, catching his breath. That was intense. Nova sheathed her blade, her expression weary but resolute. It's not over. Kael won't stop, but for now, we're safe. Ethan straightened, meeting her gaze. We make a good team. Nova's lips quirked into a faint smile. Don't get used to it. As they moved deeper into the dark, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, their light a promise of the unknown adventures yet to come. The darkest region of Solaris stretched before them, vast and uncharted. Here, the twin suns were mere memories, their light entirely absent. The air was still, and the stars shone with breathtaking brilliance, illuminating the alien landscape in silver hues. Bioluminescent plants and creatures thrived in this perpetual shadow, casting faint, mesmerizing glows that turned the terrain into a living dreamscape. Nova and Ethan stood side by side, their silhouettes framed by the starlit valley below. The danger of Kael and his followers lingered in their minds, but for now, there was peace. Together, they descended into the heart of the dark, their steps cautious yet deliberate. Nova had never ventured this far. Every step into the unknown was a test of her courage, yet she felt no fear, not with Ethan beside her. His unwavering confidence in the beauty of the night gave her strength. As they reached a plateau overlooking a shimmering expanse of bioluminescent water, Ethan stopped and set down the pack he carried. He glanced at Nova, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think this is the perfect place to fix the ship," he said, motioning to the materials they'd gathered. "But before we dive into that, I want to show you something." Nova arched a skeptical brow. "What now, human?" Ethan chuckled, pulling a small device from his pocket. It was a simple projector, salvaged from his ship. He placed it on the ground and activated it, and a field of light bloomed before them. The projection expanded, revealing an intricate map of the Milky Way galaxy. Nova's breath caught as she gazed at the glowing expanse. Stars, planets, and nebulae filled the projection, their colors vivid and otherworldly. Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice soft. "This is where I'm from," he said, pointing to a small blue planet near the edge of the map. "Earth. But all of this, it's out there, waiting to be explored. You're part of it, Nova. This galaxy, it's yours too." Nova stared at the map, her blue eyes shimmering with emotion. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I never thought there could be so much." Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. "You don't have to imagine anymore. You've already stepped into the unknown, Nova. You've proven you're stronger than your fear." Nova looked at him, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "You've shown me a world I never thought I'd see. But what happens when you leave? What happens to this?" Ethan hesitated, his dark eyes searching hers. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I don't want this to end. Not here, not now." The silence between them was charged with unspoken emotions. Slowly, Nova stepped closer, her blue skin faintly glowing in the light of the stars. "Then don't let it end." Ethan's breath hitched as her words sank in. Their eyes met, the tension between them undeniable. Slowly, tentatively, he raised a hand, brushing a strand of her white hair from her face. Nova didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The universe felt smaller, more intimate, as they stood together in the heart of the dark. And then, as if drawn together by an invisible force, they closed the distance between them. The kiss was tentative at first, a meeting of two worlds, but it deepened quickly, the intensity of their connection undeniable. When they pulled apart, Nova's expression softened, her fear and doubt melting away. "You've changed me, Ethan," she admitted, "but I don't think I'll ever be the same." Ethan smiled, his hand still resting lightly on her cheek. "Change isn't a bad thing. It's how we grow." Nova stepped back, her resolve hardening. "Then let's finish what we started. Let's repair your ship and leave this place. Together." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. Together. For the next several days, they worked tirelessly to repair the ship, combining Ethan's knowledge of human technology with Nova's understanding of Solaris's unique resources. The process was grueling, but their shared determination carried them through. As the final piece of the ship was secured, the vessel hummed to life, its lights piercing the darkness. Nova stared at the ship, her heart racing. This was it, the moment they would leave Solaris behind and venture into the stars. Ethan turned to her, his expression both excited and uncertain. "Are you ready?" Nova hesitated, her gaze drifting to the horizon. Solaris's light was far behind them now, but she felt no fear. She had faced the dark and emerged stronger. She turned back to Ethan, a confident smile on her lips. "I was born ready," she said. Hand in hand, they boarded the ship. As it rose into the sky, the stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if welcoming them into the vastness of the universe. Nova looked out the window, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and excitement. For the first time in her life, the dark wasn't something to fear. It was a canvas, vast and infinite, waiting to be explored. And with Ethan by her side, she was ready to embrace it. As the ship ascended into the cosmos, Nova looked back at Solaris, her blue eyes filled with determination. "I'll return one day," she murmured, more to herself than to Ethan. "And when I do, I'll show my people what I've learned." Ethan's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "And until then, we've got a whole galaxy to explore." Nova smiled, the stars reflected in her eyes. Together, they vanished into the vast expanse of the universe, two wanderers united by the dark and the light, ready to face whatever lay ahead.